Well, you start by being mindful of the experience as a whole. That's already something try. That's already something you try to put in a foreground. So, by for example, you're mindful of being seated on a mountaintop, answering the question. That is your present experience. Um, so, that is always the necessary starting point. Not to be absorbed with one particular sensation or feeling or something like that, but really to see what your general situation is. And you, initially, of course, you won't be able to do it perfectly, which means you're going to be making an object out of that general awareness. But that's just somehow something you have to deal with gradually through trial and error, because you don't want to be making an object out of your general experience. What you want to do is discern the general experience that's already there, even when you don't attend it. So the common tendency is just when you look at something, you put it all into the foreground, what we often say here. So even when people try to attend to, be mindful of the experience as a whole in this general manner, they still try to cram that into the foreground. And in a way, you determine what the foreground is by way of attending it. So it's something you look at directly, that's foreground for you at that time. That foreground has arisen, that foreground is enduring. And that's just the structural thing, that's just how attention works. But within that setup, you want to start to develop a peripheral vision in regard to that, whichever foreground it is, without making that peripheral vision a new foreground by overly attending it. That's why that's why the Buddha would refer to that as yoniso manasikara. So if manasikara, your attention, Pali word for attention, it's what's in the foreground, yoniso manasikara is that which is aware of the background while this foreground is present. That's why yoniso means womb. So if you have a thing in front of you, you're aware of its background, as in you're aware of the womb where it came from, so to speak, of course. So the point is to learn how to attend. That's why it's got translated as proper attention. By learning how to attend, you can learn how not to over attend and keep just seeing foreground and become completely unaware of the simultaneously peripherally present background in regard to any experience. That's why the body postures are often listed as anchors and reference points for mindfulness, because they always go into the background. So while I'm seated, I'm talking, and I'm actively attending certain things that I'm doing. I'm writing, I'm talking, I'm looking, whatever, while I'm seated. So my background is seated, basically. It's rooted in a body posture. And that's why the mindfulness and samadhi that comes out of it, it's translated as a reference point or anchoring, because that is what background is. Even when you, like on a ship, if you throw an anchor into the water, it sinks down, it disappears from the vision. It goes into the background and it holds you there. Same reference. You're not constantly keeping reference in front of you. You have it in the background and you refer to it when necessary. So, but the problem with this, it's something that needs to be developed. People can't just figure it out because, for example, now you hear about the background, you hear about the mindfulness in regard to it, and then you just turn to look at it in the same manner you turn to look at other things, to attend them. Which means what you're going to see is going to be that foreground, because as I said, it's determined by the way you attend it. That determines what foreground is, which means anything that's peripheral to that which you're not attending, that's the background. So you want to develop that indirect vision, so to speak, whereby without moving your eyes, again, metaphorically speaking, without moving your attention to the background, you start to discern it as simultaneously present there on a different level. So in this sense, while you're mindful if you're talking, that's what the problem is when people get absorbed, when they think the practice of samadhi is absorption in one particular point. So not just that you're focusing on the foreground, then you're focusing twice as hard on that foreground, hoping to catch a perfect perception, a perfect moment to see it, and so on, which means you're twice as much unaware of the background, which is the foundation of the mindfulness. Again, foundation, reference, anchoring, whatever you want to call it, means being aware of something without actively having to think about it. That's why that mindfulness automatically, if done correctly, results in knowledge, because that's the definition of knowledge. Knowing something without actively having to think about it all the time. The knowledge is there when there is need for it. You know, you understand. So that's the whole point. That's why this mindfulness results in samadhi, which then results in wisdom. It's developing along the same lines. So the trick is to keep practicing and repetitively, in the sense of learning how to attend things and then become aware of the background in regard to what you're attending without needing to attend to that directly. And that can be done through mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of intentions. That's why I often talk about taking up responsibility, for example. If you take up responsibility, no matter what particular engagement of your attention is with a particular task, the background is you are responsible for it. It's your choice, it's your karma, it's the thing you chose to do, which means it's being felt on that responsible level, which means you're automatically mindful. Through accepting responsibility, you're already doing the correct way of establishing your mindfulness in regard to that background. So that's the difference. That cannot be seen overnight or in one go, but it is possible just through sheer repetition and commitment, but also through this understanding of how you're supposed to do it. You're not expecting like to attend a perfect thing, a perfect meditation object or something that will then do the work for you, that will then reveal the truth. No, you do the work for you by knowing what the work is. That's what the Buddha would say in the suttas. He goes and listens to a wise man, then he ponders on what he heard, and then he measures the task, as in he knows exactly. And that's a precursor towards right understanding, knowing exactly what you need to understand, and that's how you can make the effort to understand it. So the practice of mindfulness, or the practice of composure, which is the practice of samadhi, you need to learn how to see things without directly looking at them, which means you need to develop that indirect recognition, indirect discernment, or simply mindfulness. That's what mindfulness is. Mindfulness and recollectedness, it's keeping that background perspective in regard to what you're doing now, without trying to over-attend what you're doing now, or without trying to overly attend that background perspective, or losing the sight of it as well. So that's why the best way to start this is just... That's why the best way to start is to start this is to start by being mindful, just in a most generic sense, of your experience as a whole. Don't try to analyze it. Don't try to pin it down onto sensations or perceptions, whatever you might be experiencing in your body. Just be mindful of the fact that you are, I don't know, seated on a chair in a little cave and answering questions, for example. Let's start with the most obvious one. Or from your point of view, seated on a chair, listening to the answers. So that's your situation. Within that, there are many ways you can indirectly establish that perspective properly. So you can be mindful of your body posture. You can be mindful of the general feeling, of the mood, for example. That's why moods often would have a sway over people, because that's not something you can directly think or perceive, your general feeling. Yet it clouds everything, and it kind of pushes you in directions of craving for this or avoiding that. It affects your behavior. But if you learn how to be mindful of the mood, it just becomes that impersonal, like a weather that just comes and goes. And that's your reference point in regard to particular things you're doing. Of course, that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want particularly, because the virtue, the sila, there is sense restraint, a moderation in eating and sense avoiding of the sense indulgence. That's necessary, because if you're engaging with that, it's impossible to develop the extent of that yoniso manasikara attention. They will develop that scope to see the background simultaneously present with whatever foreground you're engaged with. And that's why that correct practice of that foreground and background, so to speak, is no other than understanding the principle of Paticcasamuppada as well. That's what I mean. If you do mindfulness correctly, wisdom is inevitable. And so you don't have to wait for a certain revelations or something like that. It basically, you develop it by understanding what you're supposed to develop, what you need to develop. And so with a simultaneously present background and simultaneously attended foreground. Those are two things that are inseparable. Why? Because foreground determines what's not foreground. What's that peripheral? Things, by choosing to look at this, means everything else you're not looking at it, it's that peripheral, crudely put. And equally, the possibility of attending one particular thing, it's only because it's determined by the peripheral, by the all other possibilities that are not attended at a time. So these two things are inseparable. And it is, it's like, you attend this means something else is indirect to that attention. Something else is the opposite direction of where the attention came from. Hence, yoniso manasikara. And so that's what I mean. And that's a Paticamuppada principle that says, with this is. With the arising of this arises. With the manifestation of this is manifested. No matter how you translate it. The point is, you get to understand that the sense of self, that the self-centeredness of normal human experience, the point of action, the point of choice, it's completely redundant. It's just possibilities and attentions. Possibilities and intentions that are being attended. So things that you attend are arisen because they were given as an option to be attended to, which means then the background of that determines what you're attending, determines the types of your intentions as well. Of course, then your intentions are dragging that background first. So if your intentions are, for example, focused on sensuality or ill will all the time, well, those are going to become your predominant possibilities of that background. But if you become aware, you see that the whole thing works. Background, foreground, intentions, possibilities, actions, chetana, choice, and so on, completely automatically, for lack of a better word. They don't need any sense of self, and they don't need the agent of me and mine in order to be governed. That's why Arahant still continues to talk, walk, sit, decide, choose, prefer, all of those things.